Hey everyone, I'm Dan Sege from Hydro Ottawa, and I'll be hosting the ThinkEnergy podcast. So here's today's big question. Are you looking to better understand the fast-changing world of energy? Join me every 2 weeks and get a unique perspective from industry leaders as we deep dive and discuss some of the coolest trends, emerging technologies, and latest innovations that drive the energy sector. So stay tuned as we explore some traditional and some quirky facets of this industry. This is the ThinkEnergy podcast. Welcome back, everyone. This is the ThinkEnergy podcast. Many guests of this podcast have spoken at length about the important role the transportation sector has on helping Canada achieve 100% net zero emissions by 2050. Without widespread adoption of transit electrification, decarbonization simply can't be done. And we're not just talking about personal electric vehicles, but long-haul trucking, construction vehicles, and of course, public transit. Public transportation remains the only way to move large amounts of people quickly and sustainably. Only a few years ago, Clean Energy Canada and its partners released a report stating that the transportation sector was responsible for 23% of Canada's greenhouse emissions. It found that of more than 15 million Canadians that commuted, only 12% used public transportation. Nearly 75% of commuters drove a private automobile. Only a few years ago, Clean Energy Canada and its partners released a report stating that the transportation sector was responsible for 23% of Canada's greenhouse emissions. It found that of the more than 15 million Canadians that commuted, only 12% used public transportation. The electrification of public transit, paired with green energy production and increased ridership, will improve urban air pollution immensely. Did you know that a typical 18-meter bus runs up to 16 hours a day, and that one bus that consumes approximately 40,000 liters of diesel every year? That's the equivalent of 100 tons of CO2 for just one bus. Canada is in a great position with 80% of the electricity it produces coming from non-emitting sources. That means that when the electrification of transportation happens, it will be plugged into an already green grid that is only getting greener year over year. It was in April 2019 that the City of Ottawa declared a climate emergency and that it was ramping up work on key climate change plans and initiatives. In fact, the City of Ottawa has an ambitious goal to have its entire municipal operations and services, including transit, 100% net zero by 2040. That's a full decade before the country plans to achieve this goal. Ottawa has already made significant strides with its launch of the city's light rail transit, a feat that Ottawa Transit Commission says has achieved the largest reduction of GHG emissions in Ottawa's history. And change is happening incrementally. By the fall of 2021, the city will add 4 more electric buses to its fleet. There's no doubt that there's a movement happening. More and more urban dwellers are jumping on e-scooters and e-bikes as other ways to navigate a congested city. I see it every day as my wife and I share an electric car, and most recently, instead of taking our car, we ride our e-bikes for errands within 5 to 10 kilometers from our home. So here's today's big question. Is Canada's public transit entering a new era of decarbonization, transitioning away from diesel buses to low or zero emission electric buses, electric rail, and other cleaner means of mobility? How quickly can we achieve this, and how are municipalities like Ottawa leading the charge? To help drive the conversation, I've invited the Mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson, to talk about the municipal goals related to climate change and specifically the electrification of the city's public transportation. Welcome, Mr. Mayor, and thank you so much for being on our show today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Dan.
Mr. Mayor, if I'm not mistaken, you were elected as the youngest mayor in Ottawa's history in 1997. For our listeners not from Ottawa, perhaps you could tell us a bit about yourself and what fueled your passion for public service these many years.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be on your podcast. That's right. My claim to fame is I was the youngest mayor elected. I think I was 35 or 36. And I was first elected as a city councillor when I was 28 or 29 for Capital Ward. And I served 2 terms on city council as a councillor. And prior to that, I worked as director of communications for the Speaker of the House of Commons and press secretary for the Speaker as well. So I came from the federal political side into the municipal side and loved every moment of it. It's been a real honor to serve. Served as the last elected mayor of the old city before amalgamation. And then from there, I went off to become president and CEO of the Canadian Tourism Commission, which is a federal crown corporation. It's now called Destination Canada. And I did that for, I guess, about 3 years. And then politics lured me back into its web, and I became the MPP for Ottawa West Nepean for 2 terms and had the honor of serving in 3 different cabinet portfolios, the last one being housing and municipal affairs and housing. And then got back into municipal politics in 2010 and was re-elected in 2014 and 2018. So I'm now on my, I guess, 13th year as mayor of the city of Ottawa, lucky 13. And as I said, I've enjoyed every moment of it. It's been a great honor and also particularly these days dealing with things like COVID and the state of the economy, a great challenge.
Mayor Watson, let's go back to April 2019 when you declared a climate emergency in the nation's capital. Was there an inciting incident or a trigger that led to that moment? Or was it simply a buildup of evidence that all pointed to the same conclusion?
I think it was a gradual realization that more and more countries and cities and provinces were recognizing climate change as a global crisis that we're dealing with, and that we at the local level, being the most pragmatic level of government, had an opportunity to not just declare, but also act on the climate emergency, because it's one thing to simply pass a paper resolution saying you declare it, you've got to do something about it. Excuse me. And we've worked very hard over the course of the last, not just couple of months, but last couple of years with our staff and advisory groups and outside environmental experts to do whatever we can, both locally and contribute nationally through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to ensure that the senior levels of government that have the most influence when it comes to funding recognize that we need their help in order to meet our goals. So in Canada, over 450 municipal and regional governments have declared a climate emergency, including big cities like ours, Montreal, Vancouver, Halifax, Toronto, and Edmonton. And the Assembly of First Nations has as well.
Okay. I've read that municipalities in Canada have influence over roughly 50% of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. Through Ottawa's Energy Evolution Initiative, you've set a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 100% from all areas of municipal government operations by 2040. What does that mean, and what kind of changes should residents expect to see over the next 2 decades?
Well, our city operations account for only about 4% of total emissions in Ottawa. So as you mentioned, council has a goal to reduce the emissions. Our target was to decrease them by 30% by 2025. And between 2012 and 2019, corporate emissions decreased by 34%. So we're actually making progress, and we're doing a little better than we targeted for. And since the launch of LRT, diesel use and emissions from buses have decreased for the first time since 2012. And that's something pretty significant. So we're going to have to continue to do that good work. But when we talk about the corporation of the City of Ottawa, it's basically City Hall and the bureaucracy around the city. There's the broader City of Ottawa, obviously, and we have to work with them, the private sector and home builders and so on, to ensure that they meet their goals as well. But I'm very proud of the fact that, as I mentioned, for the first time, we've seen diesel use and emissions from buses decreased for the first time since 2012. So that's a good indicator of how we're doing.
I have to admit, Mayor, that I'm pretty excited to talk to you today about public transportation. I know you take public transit on a regular basis. Coming off a year like 2020, where ridership was down due to COVID, what are the benefits residents should be aware of, and why is public transit important to invest in?
Well, obviously, 2020 was a really tough year for every transit company around the world, not just Ottawa. Every transit system, at least in North America, saw a significant, 60 to 80% drop in revenues and passengers, for the simple reason that so many people were working from home. People lost their jobs as a result of COVID-19. People felt safer not going on transit. So all of those factors were front and center, and it made it rough for our transit system, particularly since we just launched a new train system. And obviously the first few months of that system, we had a lot of problems. Most of those have been resolved. The system's working really well. I think 98.5% of trips are on time, which is great. The one good thing that's come out of COVID is the fact that transit ridership is down. That's a bad thing and a good thing. The bad thing is we want to get the numbers up and make it financially sustainable. The good thing is people can take transit now and not be wedged into the train or the bus like sardines in a can, because we have more space now because there's fewer riders. So we know that, for instance, the reducing greenhouse gases from transit, and the O train in particular, is going to be one of our key tools in our toolbox to reduce our GHGs and make sure that we meet our standards and meet our goals that we set as a community through the emergency resolution.
Mayor Watson, what investments are you looking to make in regards to the electrification of public transit in Ottawa? I understand we're getting 4 new electric buses by the fall of 2021. What are the short, mid, and long-term goals to electrify public transportation? When are you planning to have 100% electrification of the buses?
Well, some people have been critical over the fact that we're only getting, a few buses in the first order. But I think what's wise on our staff's part is, let's get a few in. Let's test them in all of the different climates that we have, because, as you know, we have 4 very distinct seasons. We're also unique in cities that we're a very large geographic city. We're 2,600 square kilometers. You can fit the cities of Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Montreal, and Toronto. All 5 of those big cities fit within the boundaries of Ottawa, and we're still bigger. So I don't believe we have the technology yet where a bus can travel those long distances in a city like Ottawa without having to get charged. And you send a bus all the way out to Carp or to South End and Barrhaven, or out to Cumberland and Orleans. It takes a lot of wear and tear on the battery, and we have to have the capacity to make sure that the buses don't stall out because the battery is run dry. So we're investing, several $1 million to get the infrastructure in place, working with our partner Hydro Ottawa, as well as the bus manufacturer and OC Transpo, to get these buses up and running so people can see them, can experience them, and we can test them out in the fall weather as well as in the winter weather coming up in the next year. But the big, just going back to other aspects of transit, of course, we have the O train And the LRT has to go and be expanded farther than it is right now. Right now, it's 12 kilometers with, I guess, about 13 stations, going from Tunney's in the east, Herdman in the south, and Blair in the east end. And as you know, phase 2 of LRT is under construction as we speak, and it goes farther west to Algonquin College and Moody Drive, just on the border of Canada, and then it goes west or east rather to Trim Road and Place d'Orleans, and it goes south to the EY Center, the airport, and Riverside South, which is a very fast-growing community. So that's underway, and then this council has also approved the environmental assessments for Barhaven's LRT, because Barhaven is a very fast-growing community, as you know, as well as Stittsville in Canada. So we're working with the federal government. We need to secure the funding for phase 3. We have the funding all in place, and it's being put to good use as we speak for phase 2. But we need to go farther east, west, and south to make the system even more attractive and efficient.
So, Mayor Watson, it's fair to say that the wide range of Ottawa's weather will play a factor on the feasibility of moving to electric.
Well, I think we have to take that into account. We have some really cold winters, and we want to make sure that the buses don't stall out. The last thing we want is a bus stranded on the side of the 174 or the 417 because the battery is not worked properly. So we have to test them out. That would be the wise thing to do. You don't go and buy your whole fleet overnight without testing it and doing the proper due diligence to make sure it works well. And, just as we're anticipating significant reductions in GHGs from the O train, we'll do the same from the buses. Just to give you an example, by 2031, O train reduction of greenhouse gas emissions will amount to about 94,000 tons, and criteria air containment emissions by approximately 4,600 tons. So it's a lot. It's our single biggest weapon in our arsenal to fight climate change and to push down our GHG numbers. Is electrifying the system, as well as eventually, my goal would be to have the entire OC Transpo fleet, if it's technically feasible, to be electric over the next couple of decades.
I'm looking forward to your response on this next one, Mayor Watson. Nationwide, cities are grappling with how to best reduce transportation emissions, better public health, and lower government spending. Will the electrification of city fleets present an attractive proposition that has the potential to address all three concerns? What are the benefits that you hope Ottawa will reap from going electric and funding these types of projects?
Well, Dan, that Ottawa already has good air quality. It's going to zero emissions transit will obviously improve it further, and quieter transit also improves the experience for those living and working on the routes. If you look at Slater and Albert Street, that used to be a major transit way, lots of emissions. No one could ever have a cafe patio on Slater or Albert just because there were too many fumes coming from the buses. And the noise, quite frankly, of the engine. So that's going to improve the quality of life of people who live along bus routes as well. We know that battery electric buses do have a high upfront cost. So the more cities and governments around the world start investing in it, the price starts to go down, which makes it more economically feasible. But as many of us found out during the pandemic, increasing our use of active transportation modes like cycling and walking also has a positive impact on our physical and mental health. More people are out at skating rinks now, for instance, than I've seen in some time. So, we have still a lot of work to do, but, this is the first time City Council in the history of the City of Ottawa has invested in electric buses, and obviously the first time we've invested in electric trains. I guess you could go back to the streetcars that were electric back a long time ago before you and I were born.
Now, can you help me understand what will determine the success of transit bus systems in North America? Could it be around promoting transit buses as an environmentally friendly, convenient, an economical mode of transport? And what about our case, light rail transit, if it expands? Can environmentalists or doing the right thing help bring more ridership and encourage a switch from personal to public transportation?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think it's a little of everything that you mentioned. I think it has to first and foremost be convenient for people. People don't want to be waiting for 50 or 60 minutes between trains or buses. It has to be comfortable and safe and secure for them, and it has to be affordable. We froze the rates for most of last year because we were not satisfied with the level of service that we were getting from RTG. And we try to keep the rate going up at roughly the rate of inflation for passes and so on. We introduced the equates for those people who have an income of less than, I believe, $20,000. So that makes it much more affordable for them. They save almost, I think, 50% off a regular adult pass. We brought in, no charge service for seniors on Sundays, in addition to what we already offer on Wednesdays. And obviously, from an environmental point of view, that is another key selling point, I think, to a segment of our society that want to be good stewards of the environment. They want to make sure that they're getting on a vehicle and it's zero or as close to zero emissions as possible.
Mr. Mayor, the transportation sector accounts for approximately a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions and is one of the major sectors where emissions are still rising. Ottawa is closer to 44%, if I'm not mistaken. Electrification is widely considered an attractive solution for reducing the dependency and environmental impact of road transportation. Where does the city stand with EV infrastructure like public charging stations? And maybe let's throw in some wild cards like electric scooters and e-bikes.
Yeah, the corporate policy with respect to EV charging requires charging stations be installed at new facilities that are undergoing major retrofits, or if it's a new facility, EV chargers have to be part of that. So that's a policy that we instituted a little while ago. We have a charger here, for instance, at City Hall, and you see them at some of the new recreation centers that we've built around the city. Energy Evolution doesn't discuss electric scooters or e-bikes. That's going to be part of the transportation master plan. We did have not an e-scooter, but it was an e-scooter program with 3 companies on a pilot basis this past summer. We're waiting on the results on that. There's a lot of people love the system. There are other people that were not happy with those scooters, being thrown and tossed across sidewalks. So it was an impairment issue for people who had physical and visual disabilities. So we have to obviously take that into account if we're going to make the program permanent. But we see examples around the world, and sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If the scooter program works, that's another mode of transportation that's suitable for some people. But we want to make sure, obviously, that it's safe for everyone, the scooter riders themselves, as well as people who use the sidewalks and the roadways for either cycling or walking.
We know that zero-emission fleets tend to have higher upfront costs than comparable internal combustion engine vehicles, but the fueling and operating costs are lower over the lifetime of the vehicle, which can offset the higher sticker price. So, will constituents in Ottawa see the cost savings from electric municipal fleets? And what about infrastructure for their own personal electric vehicles?
Yeah, we're not planning on subsidizing home EV chargers. That's not part of our plan. I don't think people would expect us to do that. Our main focus is public EV charging stations, such as right-of-way and community centers. I know, for instance, Natural Resources Canada, the federal department, have a project underway to install 24 on-street chargers at 12 sites across the city, which we appreciate. We're also funding to install 3 charging stations at the Bob Macquarie Rec Center in Orleans. And this project is currently underway. And I think when residents will see the cost savings when switching, obviously, to electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, drivers save upwards of 60% on maintenance costs, and obviously 50% on fuel costs, gasoline, and above and beyond it being a good deal financially, it's a great deal from an environmental and ecological point of view.
Mayor Watson, as charging demand for fleet grows, the city will need more efficient and scalable charging systems. Where do you stand with the electric charging infrastructure to serve this mass electrification of transportation?
Well, we're lucky we have a member of parliament who's also a minister of infrastructure, Catherine uh, McKenna. And Catherine has worked very hard to help us with some of these projects, particularly when she was Minister of the Environment. So we're hoping to see increased support for both electric buses and electric charging stations from the federal government to help us, because obviously at our level of government, of the three levels, we're the poorest of the three, and we need from time to time help from upper levels of government. And this is a great project that's very tangible, understandable by the public, to ensure that as more and more electric cars are sold, we're going to need more and more electric charging stations. And I just saw on the news the other day that unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but fortunately for them, I think Norway now sold more electric cars than conventional gas cars for the first time in any country's history in the world, which I think is great for them and something we should aim for.
Time for the crystal ball, Mr. Mayor. What is your ideal future for the electrification of public transportation, especially when it comes to reducing congestion and improving driver and rider experience?
I think, first and foremost, it's getting phase two up and running, getting more people on the train system and the bus system that plugs into the train system. The first phase of phase two will open in the fall of 2022, which is not that far away. That's the existing O-Train diesel line, not the electric line. But then the Confederation line, which is east-west, the next phase I think will be in 2025, I believe, for the East End, and 2026 for the West End, around those times. So that's my preoccupation and focus, is to get that done, and then to secure the funding for phase three, which will bring us to Barrhaven and Stittsville and Canada. And then, if you can call it phase four, how do we work with Gatineau to get some kind of connectivity between their new tram system that they're working on and our LRT system in the downtown core, because we have so many people that work in Gatineau and live in Ottawa and vice versa.
Okay, are you ready to close us off with some rapid fire questions?
Sure. It sounds like reach for the top.
Mr. Mayor, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word? I guess thanks. We don't do that enough.
What is your ideal electric vision for Ottawa's future?
Well, that we continue our progress on LRT, the electrification of the system, and obviously the bus fleet and our own corporate fleet here at the city are 100% electric.
What is the one thing you can't live without?
Water. I drink a lot of water, and I need to, and you need to as well.
What habit or hobby have you picked up during shelter in place?
Probably, being attached to Netflix, watching a lot of really bad movies to pass the time.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I guess to bring people back to life.
Okay. If you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Probably go to law school, so I have something to fall back on and not rely just on politics, because there's no job security.
And lastly, what do you currently find most interesting about public life?
I think, there's a lot of good in the community. It's often overshadowed by the negativity, and social media tends to be a pretty negative medium for people to attack one another. But I see a lot of the good side of the city of Ottawa. Neighbor helping neighbor, stranger helping stranger, whether it's during the the flooding or the tornado or COVID-19. There's a lot of good in the world, and unfortunately it gets overshadowed by some of the negativity that you see in the media.
Well, Mr. Mayor, we've reached the end of another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan. It's been an honor. Appreciate the offer. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. For past episodes, make sure you visit our website, hydroottawa.com/podcast. Lastly, if you found value in this podcast, be sure to subscribe. Anyway, this podcast is a wrap. Cheers, everyone.